Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Gesha Village 24098 OMA, natural processed Ethiopia from Datura Coffee. And there's the box right there. And Datura, based out of Paris, France, and this is their first ever appearance on this channel, as they're a coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. We picked this coffee up from Airworks as part of their French ultralight special release. And while I usually don't like purchasing higher end coffees from coffee roasters I've never tried before, I decided to roll the dice with this coffee roaster as I'd heard so many positive things about them. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this coffee turned out, as this right here is day 49. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, as mentioned, this one was part of Airworks' special French ultralight release, which is to say that this coffee is definitely on the ultralight side of things, and I would say that it's about as close to the Picky Chemist's filter roast profile as well as Substance's coffee profiles as we've experienced from many other European-based coffee roasters out there. So that's to say that it's definitely on the very, very light side of things, if maybe not necessarily to the same extent as those coffee roasters, about as close as we've experienced to this point. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 28, first impression through the V60, and the coffee was immediately off to a terrific start as it was offering a very pronounced and well-defined blueberry aspect in an extremely clean sense with no trace of heaviness or fermentiness whatsoever. Perfumey florals were also present with a sweeter citric candied feel, lending itself towards a very nice start. And for a lot of people that do idolize that blueberry bomb experience within natural processed Ethiopian coffees, I do have to say that that was extremely present within this coffee in probably the cleanest sense, maybe out of any natural processed Ethiopian coffee we've ever reviewed. So I was definitely very impressed with this first try. Day 31 through the Chemex, and the coffee continues to remain extremely well defined with a great flavor separation, as the listed blueberry jam is very apt for this coffee as it's very sweet and well defined within that blueberry tone with plenty of the complementary citric and floral aspects. And this coffee is very sweet too. So the citric aspects within this coffee are also very sweet, as I think something along the lines of maybe a tangerine is listed on here, but it's definitely a fair bit more of a candied sweet citric quality to it. Berry remains the most notable and intense aspect of this coffee, as once again it was just extremely well defined. Day 34 through the April brewer, and the coffee is still excellent, but perhaps the least impressive it had been to this point, as the blueberry intensity is just a little less pronounced. It does still radiate plenty of the very clean fruit feel with a prominent candied sweetness and a slight bit of perfuminess to it, once again in line with the perfumey floral aspects within this coffee. Still very clean, still very floral forward, still another nice experience within this one. Day 37 through the V60 with Datura's recipe, which is a lower extraction recipe, which seems to be the case with a lot of these coffee roasters that do go for these ultralight profiles. And it does remain excellent regardless of the brew method, as the blueberry intensity is a bit reminiscent of what I would describe as the Luna Bermudez from Manhattan, the one we reviewed several years ago, as it just has that very intense, I don't want to say artificial blueberry sense to it, but given that I mentioned that blueberry jam that's note that they have listed on here, I could see it being maybe a little bit more of like an artificial sugary blueberry sweetness to it. It's very intense, yet extremely well defined and cleaner yet again. Tangerine, that's the citric note they have on here, is also surprisingly well defined, as it's near blatant as possible. Plenty of perfumey florals yet again. Interestingly though, a first impression of this coffee still might have been slightly better, as I think maybe just that first impression of this coffee was so impressive that it was going to be hard for this coffee to continue to live up to that. Day 40 through the Chemex with Datura's recipe, and the coffee has still been nice and consistent throughout, but it feels like the best of this coffee did come with that initial experience, as it's still offering plenty of clarity and definition to it. Maybe not to the same extent as that first impression, but nice intensity and sweetness in a relatively cleaner sense. Actually, I should say notably cleaner sense for your natural processed coffees. Day 43, final notes we have through the V60 with our standard recipe, and it was back to its best. So I actually felt like I got better results from this coffee when I did push it a little bit more, and it would be kind of interesting to see how this coffee would hold up if we pushed it even more than that. But this is a 100-gram box of coffee, so that's why this review is a little smaller, and I didn't have as much time to tinker with it as much as I would like. and it continues to remain a very clean blueberry bomb with an abundance of candied fruit sweetness to it, ranging from the citric tangerine to a peachiness at the end with a pronounced and relatively less intense perfumey jasmine also presented within this coffee. So much depth as there's even a slight bit of sweeter pineapple juice, traces of that. So just excellent, so much depth to it, just a very impressive coffee all around. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that one real quick, and that is the berry fruit level 5. So this coffee right here is the main reason why I reserve level 5s in terms of berry aspects for specific coffees, because this right here is the perfect example of it. It is so blueberry forward, it is so well defined, it is so clean and pronounced that this right here is what a level 5 blueberry should look like. So that's why it scores that level 5. Very intense, very clean, just about as defined and pronounced as you could expect for any coffee in general, regardless of processing, brew method, just anything in general. Handful of level 4s. We will start with the finish, level 4. The finish is exciting, and the finish is so exciting because it's very sweet and it comes in a number of different directions. So I've mentioned the fruit profiles to it and the floral profiles to it. There's just so much of both of those throughout the entirety of this coffee. So I was very happy with the way that it presented itself in that sense. Same thing with the sweetness. The sweetness is presented in a very candied fruit sense to it, just very sugary fruit profiles to it. So very happy with those two things there at that level 4 mark. Florality level 4, I mentioned that perfumey jasmine aspect to it, and usually when that's the case with natural processed coffees, it tends to come in a slightly more heavier sense, but there's almost no heaviness or fermentiness to this coffee whatsoever, so it would have been extremely difficult to knock it down whatsoever for that. Citrus fruit level 4, I mentioned that slight trace of pineapple juice at times, but they also had that tangerine note listed on here, and I was extremely impressed with the tangerine note, if anything. If I didn't experience that wild blueberry bomb within this coffee and it was just that tangerine forward, I would have enjoyed this coffee near equally as much because I was just really impressed with the way that that presented itself within this coffee. Also exceptionally well defined, just maybe not as in your face as the blueberry aspect was within this coffee. Stone fruit level 4. And there is a peachiness to this coffee. I can't quite recall whether or not they had any sort of peachiness, maybe a generic stone fruit note listed on here, but at the same time, when you get that combination of factors, a very prominent wild blueberry to go with a very fresh peach aspect, it's really impressive in general. So all of those within the fruit side of this tasting wheel are things that I very much enjoyed within this coffee, so I'm very happy with all of those scoring there at the level 4. We'll skip the cleanliness for right now, discuss a couple of other things. Acidity level 3, if maybe there's a slight bit of a sticking point to some people, it's that it's not the most pronounced brightness to a coffee in general, but I didn't necessarily expect this coffee to be, given that these ultralight coffees can skew a little bit on the lighter side of things relative to that acidity. Caramel level 3, that's exclusively the candied aspect of this coffee, and I really wanted to nail that point home given that I could see this being like a very prominent orange hard candy. Like I'm thinking of those Asian candied fruits. That's the best descriptor I have for the way a lot of these fruit profiles were presenting themselves within this coffee. Body level 2, that's much more expected. It is still a Gesha at the end of the day, and it's a lighter profile one at that, so level 2 did seem the most fitting place to put that. And then the final thing worth discussing in this tasting wheel is the cleanliness level 4. And I do have to say it was extremely hard for me not to push this one there at the level 5, because at the end of the day, you can tell that it isn't natural. But as far as natural processed coffees go, let's say wash processed coffees don't exist whatsoever. This is about as perfect of a level 5 when it comes to a natural processed coffee as you can imagine, given just how much definition and intensity there are to the fruit profiles within this coffee. It's just extremely clean. And I continue to harp on the fact that there isn't any fermentiness. There isn't any sort of just funkiness that can take away from it being a natural processed coffee. Not heavy whatsoever. So for that reason, it's about as high of a level 4 as you can imagine for a natural processed coffee. It's so close to that level 5, but in the same way that I reserve those berry level 5s for coffees that are just so blueberry bomb forward or red berry bomb forward, this one right here, it's not as clean as we'll say like the cleanest wash processed Panamanian Geshas. And that's the only reason why it doesn't score that level 5, but it's about as close as you can imagine for a natural. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a very good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I feel pretty safe and confident to say that this might be my favorite natural processed coffee that we've ever reviewed on this channel. Some of the other ones I can think of, the Chantuine from Manhattan, I want to say 5 years ago at this point, the Karamo from Father's a couple of years ago, the Buku Saisa from Kafa a couple of years ago, and even last year we had a very nice natural processed Ethiopia from Western Gopi. This one beats all of them. This one's easily my favorite out of those coffees that we've reviewed, and it's largely because it's reminiscent of what got a lot of people into coffee, that very wild and clean blueberry bomb experience. And for anybody that's ever looking for that, this coffee presented it in an extremely clean and well-defined sense. Just really impressed with everything within this coffee, the clarity, the definition, the fruit profiles, the florality. It's everything that I'm looking for within a coffee, and the profile of the coffee itself also very impressed. So I just think that Datura did an exceptional job within this coffee. Easily one of my favorite coffees this year. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. This is one of the easiest coffees to recommend to anybody, and it's anybody that does enjoy their very clean blueberry bombs, because it's very hard to find a coffee like this these days. And I understand that this is a pretty expensive coffee in general, but there's a reason why it's as pricey as it is. It is a higher end coffee. It is offering such tremendous definition and clarity for what this coffee is, and it's just exceptionally well executed. So for all of those reasons, it makes a lot of sense. That's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd definitely love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Gesha Village 24098 OMA, natural processed Ethiopia from Datura Coffee. Thank you for watching.